So, first session was just gestures, so grab a reference again. And we were just coming up with strategies. A lot of them, I think the first few were like 2 minutes, and then we had 5 minutes. So for some people, that's a long time. For some people, it's really short. And the whole idea was, can we draw the whole body? Even if it looks weird, can we come up with some sort of strategy to get the whole body down? What should we consider? How do we get flow? All those nice little artistic questions that we can come up with and try and answer quickly. But the main goal is just coming up with something that slightly resembles the human form, not only quickly, but in a way that makes sense to us. And how we force that out is through speed, because it'll force us to make some mistakes. It'll force us to do some really interesting designs that we wouldn't normally make if we were trying to overly focus on detail and we had all the time in the world. So we're just trying to see what's interesting when it comes to gesture. And then once we get used to making the body, coming up with flow, different methods for that, then it's can we sort of push it in a 3D realm? And that's what these form studies are for. So it's how do I take this and come up with some sort of method to where I can push it into something that looks 3D? And that's not only why we were sticking with basic 3D shapes, because basic 3D shapes are easy to understand, but also we come up with some random ones so that we can see how those shapes affect our design. And then we snuck in those cones as well. Put a little sneaky on you, put some cones in there, because it's something that we're not used to. And we now, for the first time, have to come up with a completely unique method for constructing the body. Because I'm sure you've seen people do like cube breakdowns and like cylinders for the arms, all stuff that we're very used to. But sometimes we have to learn while getting out of our comfort zone a bit. So that was why we threw the cubes in there. But when we are breaking down the basic human form here, we'll just go back to this little cube drawing. When we are breaking this down, what are some strategies that we can come up with? I'm actually going to skip the cylinders. And again, main focus, let's see this thing as 3D, and then how do we build on that information? So the first thing I always like to get into is focusing on contours. So there's obviously the very basic contour. So let's say we wanted to move this leg around, we want to grab this coming out. We can go over here, we can isolate this shape, and we can just try and focus on matching the contour that we see in the reference. So we're trying to push this angle of the sphere up a bit so that it looks like it's going up and back into space. So we're trying to just grab a basic shape, trying to move our cylinder, sculpt it around, and trying to push the angle that it's going in. And then once we have something that's more upward, we can see that with the shapes that we have laid out, this looks like it's going up and back into space a bit more than the one that we have over here. And once we have something like that, the next strategy is what I like to call Terminator contours, or just finding the Terminator. So if we were to be shading, the Terminator is just the halfway point into where the light and dark meets. So like, let's say this was a sphere, this would all be in shadow, this would be in light, and then the Terminator is that hard cutoff line that you usually see if there's bounce light coming in from there. So what we can use with our basic 3D shapes is helping us, we can use that information to help us find what direction this shape is going in. So we have our thigh, and we can find that that shape is going around the outside like this. So instead of using it as like a true contour, which would just be cutting it directly in the center, we can now also now use that to bend our shape and match the in-between cylinder to human thigh piece that we're coming up with. So all I did was just bend it and drop it down a bit more. And what these two aspects of this information is doing is we're seeing this complex shape with all these muscles and all this information going on. We're breaking it down into something that's simple and easy to understand, which is a cylinder. We're coming up with the method to manipulate that cylinder, which is a cross contour. And then we're adding another dimension that helps us prep for that shading and that 3D work. So now that we have the cylinder manipulated, we're just adding essentially just another line to indicate where that light and where that shadow is happening. So if we were to be doing this again, this is something that you could apply to all shapes. With cubes, it's a bit more in your face. So if we wanted to move around and do the same thing we did last time, We can see that with cubes, some of that information is paired together. So wherever that terminator is, it's just going to be the angle of the cube. And you can see that as we trace over our reference here. Kind of just built in. You don't get the excitement of like making things that are separate, but different methods for each shapes. And with cones, it sort of just steals with what you did from cylinders. So I'm trying to find this little shape, probably something like that. And again, you can see that we just curve it up, and then we just try and find an in-between point that makes sense to us. The next set of information I like to demonstrate when we're doing basic geometric breakdowns is what is winning and what is losing. So we're breaking things down into basic shapes, obviously. But in order to focus on 3D, the core of using all this information, we want to zoom in here and see, okay, if I'm making something out of shapes and I want them to look 3D, some of them have to be forward into space and some of them have to be backwards into space. And all that is just a bunch of words to say what is winning, what is losing, what's in front and what's behind. So when we have our shapes down, normally you start with the torso, so we have our torso here. And then we have a nice little cylinder on top to indicate that the cylinder from about here to here is on top and in front of this cylinder that's making up the torso. So when we're drawing our basic shape version, we want some sort of overlap. You can go in and erase, you can just bold your lines, depends on the style that you're going with. But we want to show the viewer some indication that that's happening. Some indication that this shape over here is in front of this shape over here. And as we're stacking shapes, if we're giving ourselves more time to consider this information, we can find moments of where that's happening. So if we were to make this a cylinder, we could push this forward because this angle of the cylinder is coming forward and cutting off our arm here, and it's going slightly back, going into the butt cheek. We can find bits of that information here. So with limbs, it'll usually not be that dramatic, except in the arms. But we can still see that since this thigh is coming out, this shape would be dominant towards the shape that's underneath it. And another little trick is we can see that happening in the limbs, especially if the arms are bent. So we can already see a little shadow starting to form that says, hey, this arm is in front of the bicep above it. And we can use that information to cheat a bit and push those shapes in front and then make the shapes behind it receding. If you're using cylinders, I know some people like the break, so they'll leave space here. So nice little cheating method to do that. And we can use that to revise our shapes, break them up, and get a bit more visual clarity of where those 3D forms are taking place and what direction they're going in. The last little strategy I want to come up with here is subshapes. So it looks like a lot of you have done this before. You're very comfortable doing things that are similar. So a lot of you were getting to like the 5 or 10 minute mark and you were like, okay, I don't know what else I'm supposed to do here. So with that leftover time is when we can start getting into muscles. And all that is just zooming in, finding where a sub shape is happening. So for example, if this entire thing was one cylinder or one cube or one cone, where are there smaller shapes happening and how do I represent it? And we can just kind of awkwardly find out where those moments are happening and stack them on top, sort of like Legos. So you can see me just carving out other things over the reference, but if we were to take this to our free drawing, it's as simple as just, okay, if I'm sticking with cones, and I know that there's a muscle here, and I know that there's a muscle here, can I stack that on top of what's going on? And it might not match the reference the way that you like, it may look a little weird, but as we start to stack shapes, it forces us to condense that detail so that instead of just seeing this little moment happening here as just a line, we can see that actually as a separate structure, and then we can come up with some sort of method with a 3D shape to push that information. So I want to grab this little thigh muscle that's coming out. So I'm just trying to come up with an excuse to exaggerate that a bit and push it out. And of course, I'm still using cones. We'll do like a sub breakdown of cones. And for the people that struggled with the cones, what about the cones specifically were hard for you? Was it visualization? Was it trying to make it 3D? So you get like a little muscle going into the shoulder blade there. But all I'm doing is I'm just making smaller cones to pop out some muscles. And I'm just coming up with excuses to give ourselves a little bit more depth. Especially if we have the time, might as well take advantage of it. Give people in chat some time to type it out. So like the little edge of the rib cage, I'll make a nice long, thin cylinder. And you can see that if we were to transition into other art styles, and we wanted to think about like, let's say we were making like a fantasy mech or like a exosuit or something, we can see how these little shapes here can sort of push ourselves in fantasy directions. And we can start coming up with armor ideas a lot easier once we get comfortable just moving shapes around and making things up. You know, we can come up with like some wings and stuff, but it's just giving us the shape language to play with anatomy and like muscle knowledge, giving us some excuses to be a bit more creative, and it's just setting the bedrock for a lot more advanced stuff that comes later. I know it's kind of obvious, but I'm just gonna make up my own philosophy, and hopefully you can translate that information into how you can use it yourself. But each shape has an advantage and a disadvantage. So obviously with cubes, like I said, if we were to draw over a reference again, that shadow information and where things are going to go back and forward into space, cubes are really good at displaying that immediately. Cubes are also good for helping us think about perspective, because generally the whatever cube shape you come up with, it's gonna follow the overall perspective grid. So wherever things are going forward or backward into space, a cube's gonna just naturally follow that direction that you're seeing happening. So even like this basic one that I made up, you can see how things are already starting to align. We can move things around to get it a bit more accurate. But that's the advantage of cubes. They can make perspective easy. It captures that shadow information and where a form is going to be forward or backward in space. Cylinders are good for sticking with semi like perspective information, but they're really good for grabbing the limbs. So whenever we're trying to make a limb, it makes it really easy to see like where the high point or fat point of a limb is and where it falls off or tapers, or where those outside contours are happening. Makes it really easy to grab that information, makes it easy to see a halfway point. That's when we can make up our own terminator for where that shadow is happening, what direction it's going in. Mainly for the limbs, that's like its strongest point. But when we get into more unique shapes, obviously if we had like a sphere, it'd be good for the head. But when we get into our more unique shapes, then we have to come up with our own rules, and we have to think about things that make a bit more sense. So with a cone, we have to consider what the strength is. So we have somewhat of a cylinder shape going. So I'm sure as you noticed with the legs, it was really easy to make the legs out of like a cone because it follows the same information. It's just it gets cut off right at the end. So we have shapes that make sense to us almost immediately. But when we have to make the core body, things that are fatter and they don't taper off, that's when that information gets a bit more tricky. So we have to come up with our own rule. So we have something that starts very coherent and then dramatically dips off. So the keyword that I'm going to capture there is just drama. So I want to look at each aspect of the figure and see where I can push that drama movement. So I want to capture the perspective a bit of this thigh, and I essentially just want to use this shape to try and push it in a direction. So right now you can see I'm trying to capture like the sway of the lower hip, and then I want to try and match that energy wherever I can. So I'm going to try and find larger shapes first, and then I'll subdivide them into smaller ones. So I want to grab this twist that's happening in the upper torso, and I'm essentially just going to make my cone try and curve down in a similar direction. And once I have a shape like this, then I can start subdividing other moments that I can exaggerate. So I have this little area, this little twist happening here. So I'm gonna try and grab all of this information and twist it using my cone. I think that's good enough. Yeah, we're not trying to make the world's most accurate image out of shapes, but we are trying to see where we can push things around and where we can exaggerate them. And that's why I think it's healthy to come up with some shapes that you're not used to using, so we can find out where those moments are happening. Same thing here, like if I wanted to grab this smaller muscle, it's going up into the armpit. Actually, you could see it when I did a little outline. We already can come up with an excuse on how we can turn that into a cone. I might even want to pop out this entire area and just have it like dig into the chest. So yeah, as we do some weird stuff, we might lose some depth, but again, that's we can go back, add those contour lines, build up some shapes, we can outline it, refine it, and just go through the entire piece. And we can come back into the information that we are more comfortable with. If we wanted to go back and exaggerate this arm here, looking very sword-like. I'm going to grab the curve in this bicep here. But yeah, main idea with stuff like this is just drama. So if we like made up our own shape, I should not have done this on the same layer. Let's go up, too far back. There we go, something like that. There. Alright, so if we wanted to make our own shape up, we can just come up with like a outside thing here, and then we'll just add like an edge. So we have like this weird tooth shape. And then what we're doing is we're seeing where this can work with shapes that we're more comfortable with. So we can use this top part as like a cylinder. We can use these as our cones again. And we can see that when we make up shapes, those three shapes apply. And then where can we come up with an excuse to match that? So like if I were to grab this whole torso, I can sort of try and come in and make that tooth shape again. This is just an experiment if you wanted to try this on your own. Like random shapes. Whole thigh, I'll do the same thing again. Alright, I don't think this is working out for this one, but we can stick with it. Come up with another little tooth shape here. But yeah, we can sort of make up our own rules on where advantages or disadvantages are happening. So like, if we were to take this seriously, you could see like, oh, okay, if I wanted to grab like the tendons here, or if I wanted to do like an alien design, this little tooth shape that I have is good at coming up with like fake anatomy. So if I had to have like muscles like wrapping around on the inside here, if I was doing like a cloth texture and I wanted like some ripped up clothing, we can see that it's good for accenting weird little shapes like that. But yeah, when it comes to stuff you're less familiar with, try to make up your own rules. And as long as you have some sense of rhythm, you can get a lot of good information out of it. Think you had a great time? Yeah, I'm glad you did. I think it's nice to have a building study session, and especially for this first set of 5 sessions, I really want to show the benefit of, don't just study to study, like have a reason to study, and how that information can build on itself as we do more complex ones. Probably just read like one more message and we'll shut things down here. I'm a wonderful teacher. Thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being a part of the community. Thank you, all you guys, for putting in that hard work, getting stuff done. Really appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys in the next session. And same as always, about a week or so before, we'll just make a little announcement, so you guys will see it. It'll probably be within the next weekend or so. Yeah, that's all I got for you guys. Thank you for showing up. Thanks for drawing. Hope you learned something, and I will see you guys in the near future. Bye.